The Boeing 747-400 is a major development and the best-selling model of the Boeing 747 family of jet airliners, while retaining the four-engine wide-body layout of its predecessors. The 747-400 embodies numerous technological and structural changes to produce a more efficient airframe. Its most distinguishing features versus preceding 747 models are 6-foot winglets mounted on 6-foot wingtip extensions, which are found on all 747-400s except for Japanese domestic market versions. The 747-400 is equipped with a two-crew glass cockpit, which dispenses with the need for a flight engineer, along with more fuel-efficient engines, an optional fuel tank in the horizontal stabilizer, and revised fuselage wing fairings. The aircraft also features an all-new interior with upgraded in-flight entertainment architecture. As on the 747-300, passenger variants include stretched upper deck as standard. The model has a maximum capacity of 660 passengers with the 747-400D variant, and can fly non-stop for up to 7,670 nautical miles with maximum payload, depending on model. Northwest Airlines first placed the 747-400 in commercial service in February 9, 1989. The 747-400 was produced in passenger, freighter, combi, domestic, extended-range passenger and extended-range freighter versions. The last 747-400, a 400ERF, was delivered in 2009. The 747-400 is the second most recent version of the Boeing 747 family, having been superseded by the improved Boeing 747-8. Development background: following its introduction in 1969, the Boeing 747 became a major success with airlines and the flying public. As the world's first wide-body jetliner, the 747 had revolutionized air travel, and cemented its manufacturer's dominance in the passenger aircraft market. In 1980, Boeing announced the 747-300, its latest 747 variant featuring greater passenger capacity. This was made possible by making a stretched upper deck previously an option on the 747-200, a standard feature. The SUD was almost twice as long as the original 747 upper deck. Besides increased capacity, the 747-300 did not offer any increase in range, nor did it include improvements in flight deck technology or construction materials. At the same time, 747s were becoming more costly to operate due to a number of factors, notably conventional flight control systems, three-person flight crews, and fuel costs. In 1982, Boeing introduced a two-crew glass cockpit, new engines, and advanced materials on its 757 and 767 twin jets. Similar technologies were also included in the design plans for newly announced rival wide-body aircraft, namely the Airbus A340 and McDonnell Douglas MD-11. At the same time, combined sales of the 747-100, -200, and -300 models neared 700, but new orders slowed precipitously. The introduction of the 747-300 did little to stem the decline, and itself faced potential competition from more modern designs. As a result, Boeing began considering a more significant upgrade for its largest passenger jet. By early 1984, company officials had identified 5 development objectives for the latest 747 upgrade: new technologies, an enhanced interior, a 1,000 nautical miles range increase, more efficient engines, and a 10% reduction in operating cost. In September 1984, Boeing announced development of the newest 747 derivative, the Advanced Series 300, at the Farnborough Air Show. On October 22, 1985, the type was officially launched when Northwest Airlines became the first 747-400 customer, with an order for 10 aircraft. Cathay Pacific, KLM, Lufthansa, Singapore Airlines, and British Airways also announced orders several months later, followed by United Airlines, Air France, and Japan Airlines. Design effort. Served early customers, mainly British Airways, Cathay Pacific, KLM, Lufthansa, Northwest, Qantas, and Singapore Airlines. Formed a consultative group to advise Boeing on the 747-400's design process. While the aircraft was planned as a new technology upgrade, Boeing originally proposed minimal design changes in order to reduce development cost and retain commonality with existing models. The airline consultative group sought more advanced changes, including a 2-crew glass cockpit. As a result of airline input, the 747-400's new digital cockpit design featured a hybrid of the cathode ray tube display technologies first employed on the 757 and 767, along with carryover 747 systems such as its autopilot. The 747-400's wingspan was stretched by 17 feet over the classic 747 through wingtip extensions. For reduced aerodynamic drag, the wings were fitted with 6 feet tall winglets. Despite the added length, the wings were 6,000 pounds lighter as a result of new aluminum alloys. The horizontal tail was also redesigned to fit a 3,300 US gallons fuel tank, resulting in a 350 nautical miles range increase, and the rudder travel was increased to 30 degrees. The landing gear was redesigned with larger wheels and carbon brakes. Internal changes further included a restyled cabin with new materials and updated fittings. New engines offered on the 747-400 included the Pratt & Whitney PW4056, the General Electric CF680C2B1F, and the Rolls-Royce RB211 524GH. The engines offered lower fuel consumption and greater thrust, along with a full authority digital engine control which adjusted engine performance for improved efficiency compared with the classic 747s. A new auxiliary power unit manufactured by Pratt & Whitney Canada was also selected to provide on-ground power from the 747-400, with a 40% reduction in fuel consumption compared to previous APU designs. Production and testing. Final assembly of the first 747-400 began at Boeing's Everett factory, the longtime site of 747 production. In September 1987, more than 50% of the aircraft was produced by subcontractors, with major structures, engine nacelles, and sub-assemblies supplied by Northrop, and upper deck fuselage frames from Daewoo. All components were integrated during the final assembly process at the Everett factory. The first aircraft, equipped with PW4056 engines, was completed over the winter months of late 1987. On January 26, 1988, the first 747-400 rolled out at the Everett factory, while the first 737-400 rolled out at Boeing's Renton factory on the same day, marking the first double jetliner rollout in the manufacturer's history. By the time of the rollout, the 747-400 program had amassed more than 100 orders. The 747-400 flew for the first time on April 29, 1988, under the command of test pilot James Loesch and co-pilot Kenneth Higgins. The first flight was 6 weeks behind schedule, owing to subcontractor delays in supplying components, and extra troubleshooting on the aircraft's electronics systems. The maiden flight took off from Payne Field, site of the Everett factory, and landed at Boeing Field, south of Seattle. After an uneventful 2 hours and 26 minutes, the 747-400's flight test program utilized the first 4 aircraft built, one over the minimum number necessary to certify the aircraft's 3 engine options. 1 test aircraft each was fitted with the CF680C2B1F and RB21524GH engines, while the other 2 featured PW4056 engines, with the 4th aircraft serving as a backup. Federal Aviation Administration certification was received on January 9, 1989, with Pratt & Amp Whitney PW4000 engines. May 18, 1989, with General Electric CF680C2S, and June 8, 1989, with Rolls-Royce RB211-524 gigaseconds. As the flight test program proceeded, Boeing encountered problems in the 747-400's production process, leading it to disclose delivery delays of up to 1 month from the first 20 aircraft built. A primary reason for the delays was the unprecedented complexity of interior configurations offered to airlines, which ranged from lavatory and galley locations to the color shades of cabin warning labels, coupled with new, relatively inexperienced workers, a lack of veteran technicians, interior configurations needing costly rework, and teething problems with electronics integration on the advanced flight deck. 747-400 production fell behind schedule. The company managed to resolve early production issues by mid-1989, with all 3 747-400 engine variants delivered within 4 months of each other, and overall delays not exceeding several weeks. Service entry and operations. The first 747-400 was delivered to launch customer Northwest Airlines on January 26, 1989, with service entry on February 9 with a flight from Minneapolis to Phoenix. This jet was then became famous for an event that happened on Northwest 85, which was an accident of a rudder hardover. This was the 20th anniversary of the 747-100's first flight. On May 31, 1989, Singapore Airlines operated the first international service using a 747-400 on a flight from Singapore to London. In May 1989, 1 week before the initial delivery to the 747-400's first European customer, KLM, the Joint Aviation Authorities shocked Boeing by refusing to grant regulatory certification for the aircraft, citing the upper deck cabin floor's resistance to collapse in the event of a sudden decompression, while the manufacturer asserted that the 747 747-400's cabin floor was no different from the already certified and in-service 747-300. The JAA maintained that the newer model would have a service life into 2020 and beyond, and was thus subject to a newer, more stringent standard which had been updated to reflect the risk of explosive devices. In the days leading up to the first delivery to KLM, negotiations between Boeing, the FAA and the JAA resulted in a compromise. A temporary operating certificate would be issued for the 747-400, provided that the manufacturer develop a structural retrofit for the aircraft within 2 years. The last-minute deal allowed KLM and Lufthansa to take delivery of the 747-400s without further delays. After the first 747-400 deliveries, Boeing began production on more variants of the aircraft. The first 747-400 Combi, able to carry both passengers and freight, was rolled out in June 1989. The 747-400 Domestic, a short-range variant of the aircraft designed for Japanese intra-island services, first flew on March 18, 1991 and entered service with Japan Airlines on October 22, 1991. A cargo variant, the 747-400F, was first delivered in May 1993 to Cargolux. By the end of the 1990s, Boeing was producing 4 versions of the 747-400. Further developments: the extended range freighter entered service in October 2002. The next month, the extended-range passenger version entered service with Qantas, the only airline ever to order the passenger version of the 747-400. Qantas initially used the 747-400 for the Melbourne to Los Angeles route, allowing the completion of the flight with full passenger load and cargo. Prior to the 747-400, Qantas would complete such flights by blocking out E zone of the cabin and limiting passenger numbers and cargo. The 747-400 featured the Boeing signature interior, which was later made available on the 747-400. In the 2000s, as part of an effort to promote sustainable and alternative fuel development, as well as lower emissions, several 747-400 operators studied the use of oil extracted from the Jatrifa plant. Air New Zealand carried out the first commercial flight using Jatrifa oil for fuel. The airline's 747-400 had one engine burning a mix of 50% Jatrifa oil and 50% jet fuel for 2 hours during the flight while engineers collected data. Continental Airlines tested Jatrifa oil in one of its airliners on January 7, 2009. Jatrifa is easy to grow, needs little fertilizer or water, and produces an oil-rich plant. Production of the 747-400 passenger version officially ceased on March 15, 2007. The last 4-400s on order were cancelled by Philippine Airlines. The last to order the -400 was China Airlines in November 2002, with the last passenger 747-400 constructed in 2005 and delivered in April of that year. It was the 1358th 747. The last 747-400 was a 4OERF delivered on December 22, 2009 to Kalita Air. Retirement and economic value. The 747-400's leasing, resale and salvage value has dropped steeply because it is relatively expensive to operate. As many 747-400s are now more than 20 years old, airlines are beginning to replace them. Airlines using the 747-400 have accelerated its retirement and are replacing the model with more fuel-efficient aircraft. Airlines such as British Airways and Qantas, who plan to maintain the same capacity on routes currently served by 747-400s, have ordered the Airbus 380 rather than the updated 747-8. The main appeal of the 747-400, like its predecessors, was its range rather than its capacity, and in many cases it has been replaced by wide-body twin-engine aircraft of similar range such as the Boeing 777, Boeing 787, and Airbus A330. The change in emphasis from hub-and-spoke operations to point-to-point flights has also reduced the need for jumbo jets. For example, Delta Airlines has reduced the number of flights it operates from the United States to Narita International Airport that are intended to transfer passengers to other destinations in Asia. Instead, Delta will utilize twin-engined wide-body aircraft operating from an expanded hub at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Total capacity will be cut, but consequently load factors will increase. In April 2015, Delta announced it would accelerate the retirement of its 747-400 aircraft and replace them either with Airbus A330 aircraft reassigned from cancelled international runs, or with new Airbus A350 aircraft now on order, that will leave just 6 747s flying for the airline in 2015. Delta could not keep the 747s full without deeply discounting ticket prices. The discounts and increased maintenance required of a four-engine aircraft led to a drag on profits. Moreover, economic weakness in air cargo markets has slowed demand for cargo conversions, since the cost of replacing a 747-400 is high. Some operators choose to fly the 747-400 to the conclusion of its accepted useful life and then scrap it. The current parts resale value for this aircraft has been reduced to its engines. When a 26-year-old 747-400 owned by Delta Airlines flew through a violent hailstorm, Delta indicated it was likely the plane would be scrapped. George Dimitrov, head of valuations for Flight Global, estimated the aircraft's value before the incident at about $8 million. He noted that this is not the same as its insured value. Several airlines have retired the 747-400 from the trans-Pacific market. Remaining operators in 2014 include EVA Air, Qantas, British Airways and United. United is retaining its 23 747-400s for now, but the airline's deployment of them also reflects a change in emphasis from Asian hubs to domestic hubs, meaning that it will have more direct flights from the United States to secondary Asian market cities. This may reduce the need for jumbo jets. Design. The 747-400's airframe features extended and lighter wings than previous 747s, capped by winglets. The winglets result in a 3% increase in long-range cruise, improved takeoff performance, and higher cruise altitudes. The extended wingspan also gains an additional leading-edge flap section. When unfurnished, the basic 747-400 fuselage is lighter than preceding models, but when fitted out it is heavier and stronger than previous models. The landing gear uses the same configuration as previous 747s, but with carbon brakes replacing the previous steel ones, and overall weight savings of 1,800 pounds. The 747-400's glass cockpit features quad displays which show flight flight instrumentation along with engine indication and crew alerting system. Diagnostics. The flight engineer station on previous 747s is no longer installed, and the new displays and simplified layout results in a 2/3 reduction of switches, lights, and gauges versus the classic 747. Other new systems include an advanced Honeywell flight management computer which assists pilots in calculating optimal altitudes and routes, along with a Rockwell Collins central maintenance computer which automates troubleshooting tasks. The redesigned 747-400 interior features new cabin side walls, heat-resistant phenolic glass, carbon composite paneling, and larger storage bins. An enhanced in-flight entertainment framework, called the Advanced Cabin Entertainment Service System, debuted on 747-400, which integrates a 18-channel audio capability, 4 passenger intercom announcement zones, intercabin telephones, and passenger lighting into a central system. An 8-bunk overhead crew rest is installed above the aft cabin, while a second crew rest area is located on the upper deck behind the cockpit for flight crew use.